A strange meteor has fallen to Earth just a while ago. This meteor seems to be emitting a powerful energy signature. Something this powerful must not fall into the hands of evil.
I understand.
Hey, when did video game stories get good? That sounds like a thought exercise or a hypothetical or something, but I think we can actually narrow it down. On the one hand, you could argue that they were always good, but I'd counter that with no.
I don't know where this energy came from, but you cannot let it fall into Dr. Wily's hands. You must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
Okay, look, I mean no disrespect here, but did they really have to pick a guy with a speech impediment?
That's a good question.
Back when video games were new, the technology they had access to was always going to be a limiting factor to the kind of story they were able to tell. Obviously, as graphics improved, things would get flashier and more movie-like, but in my opinion, what was always more important than visuals was storage capacity. The original Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Entertainment System was 31 kilobytes in total. That includes 32 levels, a dozen different enemies, and one boss fight that gets recycled 8 different times. To put that into perspective, this video was 228 kilobytes, which is 7 times bigger than this entire video game. We're just over 1 minute into this video, and you've already watched over 2,000 Mario Bros. Worth of data, which is like maybe 6 megabytes? The craziest part about a game this tiny is that somehow they fit a story in there. See? That's not nothing. You might recognize this little dude as You might recognize this little dude as Toad, but back in 1985, if you wanted to know what his deal was, the game definitely wouldn't tell you. But if you checked the included manual, you'd know that he's one of 7 mushrooms who served in the court of Princess Toadstool, called mushroom retainers. Look, I didn't say the story was good, but it's not like that's an important part of a Mario game. The only thing that really mattered was how it played, which was the case for the vast majority of games published in the 80s. Yeah, most of them had a plot that you could find on the back of the box, but it was only there to provide context for why you were running around as a buff dude with a gun blowing people up in the jungle. In a video game called Contra. Oh! The Super Nintendo could hold around 50 times more data on its cartridges, which naturally led to more complex storytelling. The narrative differences between the original Legend of Zelda and A Link to the Past are massive. The first game starts like this. Just, there you go. You're a green guy who can, like, walk around, and if you head into this cave, you'll talk to a guy, and then he gives you a sword, and now you're a little green guy with a sword. A Link to the Past starts off with a wall of exposition about the lore of Hyrule, the power of the Triforce, how the evil wizard Aghanim killed the king and imprisoned Princess Zelda, who visits Link in a dream begging him to rescue her. You're still just a little green dude walking around a map, but there are stakes and gravitas. Sure, it's a little primitive, but it gives you something to care about. There's context. And your hair is pink for some reason. But is it a good story? Well, just based on the introductory cutscene, it certainly has the potential to be, but it's important to consider that even though the two terms are used interchangeably, there's actually a pretty huge difference between story and plot. Ooh, I get to be pretentious for a minute.
Aren't you always a little pretentious?
A plot is the sequence of events. It's the who, what, where, when, and why, but that's all it is. The story is the presentation. It's the character development and their interactions. It's the emotional core. It's the vehicle that delivers the plot to you. Think about it this way. The plot is a pizza recipe. The story comes from mixing the ingredients together, waiting for the dough to rise, the way your apartment smells like burnt pizza when you burn the pizza, and the indigestion you get when you keep pretending you're not actually lactose intolerant. It might be a world-class pizza recipe, but if you're a bad baker, it's gonna be a bad pizza. An excellent, compelling plot can be ruined by mediocre storytelling. And if you still think that doesn't make any sense, then I'm gonna beat a horse that died in 2005 and complain about the Star Wars prequel trilogy, because even though it ended 19 years ago, it's still in the zeitgeist for complicated reasons. If you just read a plot synopsis, it sounds like a pretty compelling narrative, complete with political intrigue, the philosophies of warfare, cool space magic, and weird bug creatures and stuff. But if you actually watch the movies, the main character will say, "From my perspective, the Jedi are evil." Less than a day after murdering a school full of children, like, my dude, I don't think you're allowed to say "from my perspective" at that point. It's a good plot with really bad storytelling. Hi, Camwing here. YouTubers will often make inflammatory statements on controversial topics to spur conversations in the comment section. This increases the level of viewer engagement, thereby boosting the video's algorithmic success. So, returning to A Link to the Past, is this a good story? Well, a plotline about an evil wizard taking over the kingdom and kidnapping the princess so he can perform a ritual that will resurrect a demon and open a gateway to the Dark World sounds pretty compelling. The important question here is, how is that story told? And, well, it's a video game, so it's delivered in little bits and pieces with the express intention of servicing the gameplay, which is about crawling around dungeons and collecting items to solve puzzles. The impact of the story comes from watching it unfold as a result of the actions that you, as the player, took. If you were to divorce the story from the game and transcribe it into a novel with as few modifications as possible, it would be pretty short, none of the characters would have any depth or personality, and there would be a lot of descriptions of a guy walking around the kingdom picking up items. The point I'm trying to make here isn't that A Link to the Past is a bad story, because it's not, but the way its narrative is delivered is specifically tailored to be a video game, which means that kind of story doesn't always work in a book, just like how what works in a book doesn't always work in a movie. So that kind of begs the question, why are video game movies almost always bad? I don't think it's because they were trying to adapt bad stories, it's because they needed to reinvent the world of the game into something that'd work on film. Like, this is cool, but how do you do a movie about it? The Sonic the Hedgehog movie had decades of storylines to choose from across a dozen different games.
You're gonna crash! Ah!
But they went with the very standard template of CGI character is a fish out of water who interacts with humans, and even though you specifically came to watch the CGI character, the movie is almost entirely about the humans. Critics thought it was okay. Sonic 2 had a lot more Sonic by bringing in Tails and Knuckles, but the movie's B story was a cheesy rom-com between human characters that weren't in any of the games and barely even mattered in the first movie. And it was like 40% of the runtime. These movies are nothing like the games at all, but Sonic fans are so desperate for something that isn't actively terrible that a 6 out of 10 is pretty exciting for them. Hi, this is Comment Bait. Go on. Video game narratives, even really good ones, used to exist specifically to service the gameplay, but I attribute that to technological limitations more than artistic ones. When the Xbox 360 and PS3 came around, studios were more or less unhindered by the hardware that they were developing for, which allowed them to tell whatever stories they wanted. This was when the era of truly cinematic video games began, and there's no better starting point than Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. It's also the era of high definition, so a game like this deserves to be seen on the...
Hello.
Hey, sponsorship horse. Couldn't help but notice you didn't use the door again.
Yes, because this is scary. Why?
Okay, why?
Because it's Halloween.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is. So do you have
Isn't
a sponsorship
scary
or... Oh, no, sorry, you go ahead.
Isn't it scary to think about day brokers buying and selling your personal info? Blah?
Yeah, it actually is. That's why I have a membership with this video sponsor, Incogni.
Blah, blah, blah.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. Incogni is a service that sends automated requests to have your personal information removed from data brokers, which are companies that scrape any info they can find from any number of sources to create a profile on you.
Me?
Yes, that profile...
But I'm a horse. Voiced by a child. Blah.
That profile can contain things like your phone number, your physical address, your family members, then it's sold to the highest bidder. So if you've ever wondered info be removed from their databases, which they legally have to do, but do you really want to call every single one?
Let me put you on hold while I check with my supervisor. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah.
I've only been using Incogni since August, and they've already gotten my info removed from over 320 databases, which they estimate would have taken 287 hours if I did that myself. I have no idea how I got in so many of them, but that would explain why my phone was constantly blowing up with spam calls. Keyword being was. Since then, it's been delightfully quiet. So when you're ready to get started, you can visit incogni.com/camwing to get 60% off an annual plan. Now please get out of my apartment.
Nah, I'm gonna eat your blood.
Once again, you can visit incogni.com/camwing to get 60% off an annual plan, or click the link in the description. Uncharted Drake's Fortune is a very weird video game. As a third-person shooter, it's okay. Yeah, it came out in 2007, so not every mechanic is going to hold up to modern scrutiny, but it wasn't even the best third-person shooter to come out in 2007. The reason Uncharted is held to such high regard is because of everything slapped on top of the gameplay. The game's lead designer, Richard Lemarchand, I should probably have looked up how to pronounce this before I recorded it, but we're just going to keep this whole thing in. Richard said in an interview with GamesRadar that before development even started, the studio Naughty Dog was always aiming for, quote, character action games that, as closely as they can, integrate terrific cinematic action with really great classic gameplay. Before they had a story, before the main character even had a name, they were prototyping systems that would allow the gameplay to feel more like a movie, with mechanics based around dynamic cinematic camera angles and realistic combat animations. Side note, I can't quite put my finger on why, but the original character model they used for prototyping looks like the physical embodiment of the year 2005. You know what I mean? Like, just his face. He just looks like 2005. I don't know. Anyway, Uncharted was far from the first cinematic video game, but what made it special was the execution. Video game narratives are usually built around the fact that they're a video game, but the goal here from the beginning was to make something that felt like a Hollywood blockbuster popcorn movie, so the narrative had to at least be good enough for that. And they kind of nailed it. The protagonist, Nathan Drake, claims to be the direct descendant of Sir Francis Drake, who was buried at sea in 1596 after succumbing to dysentery, which medical historians consider to be the funniest way to die. Nathan convinces investigative journalist Elena Fisher to take him out to sea where he believes the centuries-missing casket of Sir Francis Drake to be located, and after successfully retrieving the casket, confirms his suspicions of where the casket was located. They also discover it to be completely empty, except for a small journal, which confirms his suspicions that Sir Francis Drake was actually a small journal that pooped itself to death. This already feels like a movie, but it turns into a video game when, pirates!
Pirates?
Nathan turns to Elena and hands her a gun, asking if she knows how to use one.
It's like a camera. You point and shoot, right?
Good girl.
Hey, completely unrelated, but have you ever seen Indiana Jones? The Uncharted series takes a lot of inspiration from those movies, and they're not exactly trying to hide it. The swashbuckling adventures of a treasure hunter heading to underdeveloped nations and blowing up bad guys is a staple of action movies, and we can credit that trope's origins back to Raiders of the Lost Ark. But Indiana Jones kills a lot of people. More than you probably realized. Sometimes it's played off as a joke, sometimes it's an edge-of-your-seat fight sequence, sometimes it's self-defense, but it almost never matters. It's just the cost of doing business for a treasure hunter. According to this video, across all his movies, Indiana Jones has killed 87 people. When you really think about it, that's a lot. But because the movies don't really want you to think about it, it never really comes up in the story. Action movie deaths are just part of action movies. The hero fights bad guys, so it's all good. That guy was probably evil. Probably. Anyway, back to Uncharted. Hello, woman I just met who has seemingly never used a firearm. Take this and use it to end the lives of complete strangers. Don't worry about the moral implications. They're pirates. In any other video game, this thought wouldn't even need to cross your mind. You're usually playing as an assassin, or a super soldier, or a different super soldier. We didn't really see a lot of grounded, scrappy protagonists like Nathan Drake in action games up to this point, and the fact that he's just a guy is why you go, hey, wait a sec, this guy's a killer. Now, he doesn't feel like a heartless mass murderer, but he and this woman he just met killed about a dozen people, and it will never come up in the story. Sure, they acted in self-defense here, but I'd probably feel a little bit of trauma if I just took several lives.
You alright?
Nothing that years of therapy won't fix.
This is often called ludonarrative dissonance, which has kind of become a cliche topic whenever people bring up the Uncharted series. It's a compound of ludo, which is Latin for game, and narrative, which is what people who use semicolons call a story. If you can control the protagonist, you can make them do stuff that the writers never really thought about, because why would they? This version of Spider-Man is controlled by me, so when I'm swinging around the open world, I can make him do whatever I want. Imagine, after throwing a garbage can at a pedestrian, that the game goes, actually, Spider-Man wouldn't do that, so, yeah. You're canceled, and you're gay, and you don't get to control Spider-Man anymore. Would he do this in the comics? Probably not, but what he would do, and what I am actively doing, are two completely different things, because the point of the video game is that you get to control it. But this is where things get tricky. The Spider-Man games are open world, which means you can screw around and do whatever you want, until you're advancing the story. Now you have to do what the writers and game designers expect you to do. You can still control the character, but you can fail that story mission for doing the story wrong. It's a lot more obvious that this stuff is canon, and this stuff is, well, not. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an extremely cinematic video game with a linear story, but it's also an open world game where you can do whatever you want.
Hello?
The story missions are where you actually advance the plot, but the actions you take in the open world will very subtly change the way that story plays out, based on whether or not you play Arthur Morgan as a good guy or a bad guy. There are real consequences for killing somebody. At the same time, though, if I lure a bear into a crowded city center and kick it in the butt so many times that it dies, somehow I don't think that's going to affect anything. Which is what makes Uncharted so weird. It's a game where there are exclusively story missions. It is completely linear, and there is zero decision-making. The designers not only wanted me to throw garbage cans at civilians, I am required to in order to advance the plot. Then after I beat the level, I get a well-acted, well-produced cutscene where nobody takes a step back and says, "Hey Nathan, you want to talk about that time you lured a bear into the city and kicked it in the butt so many times that it died?" Instead, they deliver a couple quippy action movie one-liners and we continue on our journey to discover El Dorado. Okay, look, the first Uncharted game is pretty corny. It's the video game equivalent of a Fast and the Furious movie where you just kind of turn your brain off and let it happen. But as the series progressed, the stories got more ambitious, and the characters were given a lot more emotional depth. They stopped feeling like generic action movie protagonists and turned into actual people. I'm a busy dude. If I'm not at my day job, I'm probably at home working on this YouTube channel in some capacity. When I finally carve out some free time to sit down and play a game for not YouTube, I want to play it. I don't want to just set down my controller and watch a movie that looks like a video game. Yoga Ball YouTuber Nakey Jakey calls this impatience for cutscenes and slow-paced story segments Whoopie Goblin Gamer Brain. But my doctor calls this severe impairment in ADHD. What I'm getting at here is that with the Uncharted series, the thing I care the most about is the cutscenes. Their goal was to make a game that was essentially a playable movie, and they succeeded. But they created the opposite of the problem that I have with other story-driven games, which is that I don't actually care too much about the game part of the game. I just want to know what happens next. The story isn't structured around furthering the gameplay. The gameplay is structured around furthering the story, which is something that I would probably be complaining about if it wasn't told so incredibly well. By the time we get to Uncharted 4, Nathan Drake is out of the game and trying to re-assimilate into a normal working-class life. You remember Elena Fisher from the first game? Well, they're married now, and they have been for years. They decided that the unparalleled risk of treasure hunting was no longer worth the paltry reward, so they used what spoils they had to buy a modest house and finally settle down. After a long day of questioning this decision, Nathan's long-thought-dead brother Sam comes back into his life. 15 years prior, the two of them infiltrated and subsequently attempted to escape from a Panamanian prison in an effort to find the treasure of legendary pirate Henry Avery. Their escape route was compromised, which resulted in the perceived death of Sam.
Sam, no. No, you hold on! Hold on!
And although he miraculously survived, he spent the following 15 years rotting in a prison cell with no way to communicate with the outside world. Sam tells his brother that he was able to escape with the assistance of notorious drug kingpin Hector Alcazar, the Butcher of Panama, who broke him out of prison on the condition that with his freedom, Sam would find and surrender Avery's long-lost treasure to Alcazar's gang, with failure to do so resulting in his execution. And as an escapee from prison, it's not like they could contact the police for assistance here, so they were completely on their own. And emotional Nathan agrees to help his brother and return to a life of treasure hunting, one last time in direct defiance of the agreement he made with his wife. He covers his tracks by saying he finally took the Malaysia job, a business trip that would have been a major financial boon for the couple, but one that would see the two separated for months. This makes it hit so much harder that when he finally tells her,
"Hey, hon, it's me." Yeah, listen, you're not gonna believe this. Jameson just walked in here with the permits. Yeah. I know, but...
exact thing he said he would never do again. As the two brothers continue on their adventure, Elena will regularly check in with Nathan, who does his best to keep his story straight, but forgets that Elena was an investigative journalist. She puts two and two together pretty quickly, and after tracking him down, confronts him in an emotional moment that plays out like this.
You lied to me for weeks. If you were killed, I wouldn't have even known about it. And now you have a brother. Who are you?
Come on. I'm me. Come on, it's me. It's different this time.
In 2016, this was an unprecedented level of emotional growth and character development for a video game.
The look on your face when you walked into this room. If you're done lying to me, then you should stop lying to yourself.
Which makes it feel all the more contradictory when 20 minutes later the game goes Nathan Drake is killing so many people right now. The game's emotional groundedness is almost at odds with its desire to just be a fun video game, which is why when we talk about ludonarrative dissonance, we talk about Uncharted. I'm not trying to diminish how massive of an achievement this series is, but it's just weird. The question is, how do you avoid that? And the answer is God of War. The original God of War games on the PlayStation 2 and 3 had an identity that was pretty firmly grounded in that early 2000s edginess. Let's just say these weren't games for girls. These were boy games for boys. I'm going to briefly summarize the entire story of the original trilogy as quickly as possible, so spoiler warning. All you really need to know is that the protagonist, Kratos, was the demigod son of Zeus, born as a mortal man in Sparta. Kratos was a servant of the Greek god of war, Ares, who manipulated him into committing some atrocities that resulted in the death of his own family. In an act of revenge and pure, unmitigated rage, Kratos killed Ares, unknowingly taking his place as the new god of war. In his original form, Kratos was a vindictive, rage-fueled character,
I respect women.
who, in spite of being one himself, despises the pantheon of gods for the way they treated humans, and made it his mission to take them all down. But he was so blindsided by his rage that he failed to consider the important jobs the gods all had and the severe consequences that the humans would suffer from as a result of their deaths. By the end of the series, Greece was completely destroyed, the gods were all killed, and every last innocent human was taken with them. The original trilogy is about watching the protagonist take what he considered to be a righteous quest of vengeance, who by the end of the series had become its biggest villain. It wasn't until he was the single resident of a world he had destroyed that he recognized the monster he had become. Okay, with all that preamble, remember what I said in the Zelda section about how what works in a game doesn't always work in a book. Hey, I'm recording right now. Can it wait a sec? Okay. Well, the God of War series is one of the only video game franchises I'm personally aware of to have novelizations of the stories that not only survive the divorce from the medium of video game, but are elevated by the addition of context that we didn't get to see in the source material. If there's one thing written word can accomplish better than any other medium, it's providing us a direct view of the character's perspective. We know exactly what they're thinking and feeling because the book quite literally spells that out.
What are you doing? Now his guard is up. Only fire.
Kratos stammered through his thick, trimmed chestnut beard. Then he forced himself to stop. He needed to check his anger. He was dealing with a child.
Only fire. When I tell you to fire.
I'm sorry,
Atreus said reflexively, though he could not fathom why his failure so angered his father. His mother always encouraged him when he missed during their hunting lessons. She was eternally forgiving compared to his father.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
You can't really do that in video media without coming across as clunky and awkward. The audience must think I don't watch anime. Well, joke's on them. I don't watch anime. I only did this because it was easy to animate. Heh. Heh. God of War 4 is a much more emotional, introspective game where Kratos is forced to reconcile his past actions. And since we can't hear his thoughts, we rely on extremely subtle facial animations and excellent vocal performances to get the correct emotions across.
Say it.
I will be better.
After the destruction of Greece, he relocated to Midgard, the realm of Norse mythology, keeping his godhood a secret and intentionally isolating himself from the world in order to live as close to a normal life as was possible. We don't know how long it's been in between games 3 and 4, but it was at least enough time for him to have settled down with a woman he fell in love with, build a humble cabin in the woods, and father a now 11-year-old child named Atreus. At its core, the plot of this game is actually pretty straightforward. After the unexpected death of his mother, Atreus and Kratos were tasked to carry her ashes to the highest peak in the 9 realms. The story is about the complications they encounter on their way, both external and emotional, which end up being the biggest challenge for Kratos. His outward rage was replaced with a quiet, militant sternness, the physical one which is strained by his hesitation to let Atreus know that he is a god, an inalienable truth about himself that is also his deepest shame. Also, you fight a lot of big scary monsters and kill bad guys and stuff. What makes this game so special is the connective tissue that bridges the gameplay into the story. In Uncharted, you beat the level, you're rewarded with an incredibly well-produced in-game cinematic where you can set down your controller and watch. But that means there's a wide disconnect between gameplay and cutscene. In God of War, there is virtually no ludonarrative dissonance because the actions you take are as much a part of the story as the cutscenes you watch, and the two are blended together completely seamlessly. There are no hard transitions from gameplay to cutscene to gameplay. It all flows in one continuous, unbroken motion. Like this. You're controlling Kratos, and when the camera moves away from behind his back, you know it's your turn to watch the events play out.
Jump, boy!
Right! Look out!
Here they come. Stay behind me and protect our flank.
Yes, sir!
Then as soon as the camera repositions itself, you're right back in control. And this happens constantly, but it goes deeper than that. When you blow up a henchman in Uncharted, it doesn't really matter. They're one of a million hired goons to stop you from getting to the treasure of El Dorado, or the lost city of Shambhala, or from finding Florence Henderson's 9 very special grains of basmati rice. The mercenaries you fight ultimately have no bearing on the story. They're just an obstacle placed as a gameplay contrivance. In God of War, Kratos is a killer. Several lifetimes of violence have been deeply ingrained within him, but the only thing he wants is to be able to move past that. Sure, the world is full of baddies, and yeah, they're gameplay contrivances, but every fantasy creature he kills or Norse god he fights puts him right back on the path he's been trying to remove himself from. But it goes even deeper than that. This is still a video game after all, so when you do something particularly video gamey,
You gonna carry that everywhere?
I just might.
it gets acknowledged by the characters in the world.
Maybe instead of looting a sacred temple, we could just get out of here?
If I want your opinion, boy, I will ask for it.
That's the main difference in storytelling here. Please don't misinterpret my criticism of the Uncharted series. It is a towering achievement, but as much as I love them, I don't really find myself coming back to replay the game. I'd rather just look up the cutscenes on YouTube, because they are phenomenal. But it feels like you're being pulled along for the ride, and the story happens to you. The 2 newest God of War games are the exact inverse. You are the vehicle that carries the plot. The story happens because you are Kratos.
I know who you are.
What's going on? Do you know him?
More importantly, I know what you are.
The Uncharted games feel like movies that you can control, which is one of the biggest criticisms I've seen thrown at them. People think that Naughty Dog should have just made a movie since they clearly wanted to. This one doesn't count. What makes God of War so much more narratively compelling isn't just the depth and complexity of the characters, it's that you aren't just watching the story. You're participating in it. But they don't even come close to comparing to the cinematic masterpiece that is Kingdom Hearts.
Look out!
Thank you all for 100 subscribers.
It's a little more than that.
101. 101.
A little more than that.
2 million.
That was that, yep. Yeah, it actually is.